Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching How 500 Poles Became Black by Jack Rackam. So we'll get a chance to talk about Poland and Haiti, which is pretty exciting. You know, I always want to do more content on Haiti. It's a country I find absolutely fascinating with a really engaging story. So today we'll get to talk a little bit about that. Now, before we get into this one, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
These men are black. As you might have noticed, they are also very white. What happened? What's going on? Just why? The short answer is that these guys from Poland decided to fight in one of the ugliest wars of all time for the sake of Haitian independence and were awarded with honorary blackness, but I think that raises more questions than it answers.
Yeah, that may seem like a tenuous connection, may seem like a strange turn of events, but with all the necessary context, it does begin to make sense, right? Everything comes together.
So let's see if we can find a little more context. For a few hundred years, right around the end of the Middle Ages into the Renaissance era, Poland was a great power on par with England, Spain, France, Germany, you name it.
Poland, not only was it a physically massive country, but it was a great power on par with the other great powers of the era.
Polish government was also way ahead of its time in giving power to a parliament instead of the king. But being one of the first constitutional monarchies in Europe, the Polish parliament had a few bugs to work out.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was ahead of its time. I think that's sort of the wrong way to frame it. What it really is that there have been many different styles of government throughout history. And when we think of monarchies, we often think of absolute monarchies, right? A system where the monarch has all the power. But throughout history, there have been a lot of monarchies where the monarch is less empowered than that, right? Where you have a parliament with a fair amount of influence, or the king is elected in some way. Now, that doesn't always mean some sort of democratic popular election. It can mean, however, that the king is selected by a parliament or a certain group. So, ahead of its time, I don't know if that's really the right way to put it. I think that's sort of imposing our modern understanding of things on the Middle Ages, but I can understand why he says that.
Poland was so incredibly committed to the idea that all noblemen are created equal, that every single member of parliament was trusted with the nuclear option. Any member of parliament at any time could utter the phrase, "I do not allow it," and whatever law was being debated would immediately fail. And also, the entire parliamentary session was ended. And also, every other law that had been passed in that session was canceled.
God damn. So, this is not a democratic or popular system in any sense of those words, but it is a system where the nobility, the aristocracy, has a lot of influence. And of course, like I said, you look throughout Europe or around the world during this and different eras, you'll find systems where the nobility as a class have more or less power. And you have some of these moments like the Magna Carta in England, where the nobility sort of asserts themselves. So here we have a pretty influential aristocracy who can really exert their authority.
This was a sacred power, and frankly, very stupid. People abused the hell out of this, and the Polish government could literally not do anything unless every single piece of legislation was passed unanimously. All of Poland's neighbors quickly discovered they also could abuse the hell out of this system, because if Poland ever did anything they didn't like, all they had to do was bribe one single MP, and they could bring the entire Polish government to its knees.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of infiltration in this system, or at least paying off behind the scenes.
Poland was so weak that by the late 1700s, the only people passing laws in Poland were the Russians. The Russian ambassador was literally walking through the Polish capital, arresting Polish politicians, and nobody could stop him. The people of Poland finally created a second parliament, which was exactly the same as the first parliament, but without the nuclear option. But by then, it was too late. As soon as the Polish people started trying to pass reforms, Poland was carved up by its neighbors.
Yeah.
The Polish army stood no chance.
Yeah, Poland literally came to not exist as a country anymore. it was completely carved up by Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Now, Poland will have a couple moments of existing and then not existing again, but really, from now until, like I said, there are a couple moments, like after World War I, Poland pops back up, but then it sort of gets crushed again. Really, from this point until the fall of the Soviet Union, Poland is experiencing some sort of foreign domination for most of that time. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
So now there's no more Poland, but there's still a bunch of Polish soldiers who don't want to fight for the people who just conquered them. They really miss having a representative government and would kill for a chance to liberate Poland. And guess what? France would be very interested in liberating Poland because thanks to the French Revolution, everyone in Europe is out to get them and they desperately need allies.
Yeah, so the cause of Polish independence sort of becomes a cause célèbre for a lot of liberals throughout Europe, meaning becomes a very popular political movement, right? Liberals in all these different countries, they back Polish independence. It's a pretty easy thing to back against the state of Poland being taken over by its three neighbors. It's sort of, everyone sees the Poles as the underdogs. They're easy to support. Now, that doesn't mean Polish independence is easy to achieve. It's not, just that they get a lot of supporters. And France, especially following the revolution, is one of those big supporters, right? So this is where the politics start to get intermingled. I will say, additionally, this time of Poland literally losing its state leads to a lot of Poles going elsewhere, right? Emigrating. And some of those Poles get up to wacky shenanigans around the world. Whatever they're doing, some military shenanigans, some political shenanigans, right? They accomplish a whole bunch of stuff because, some of them are like, well, let's get out of here, right? So these sort of things will combine in what we're talking about today.
Also thanks to the French Revolution, France is fighting for liberty and equality. At least, mostly. The French Revolution played out a little differently in Haiti. Haiti is a poor country today, but Haiti in the 1700s was a gold mine. Haiti's sugar exports were worth almost as much as all of the exports from the entire United States of America.
Yeah, so at this time, Haiti is the French colony of San Domingue. It is an extremely brutal plantation economy that produces an immense amount of sugar, right? It is extremely valuable, right? It essentially makes France's colonial empire. Obviously, France holds other territories and colonies, but San Domingue is by far the most important due to the amount of money it makes, right? So San Domingue as a colony, it's got a high degree of importance, and it makes a lot of money, but like I said, it only survives, the amount of production it's doing because it's this extremely brutal, violent slave plantation economy.
But that sugar export was sustained by slavery on an enormous scale. Every year, tens of thousands of people were piled into...
And we're talking an enormous scale. He's going to talk about it here, but an immense amount of enslaved people were transported to Haiti every single year because the life expectancy of enslaved people in San Domingue was so extremely low, right? The sugar plantations were extremely brutal. The conditions were horrible. It was a very dangerous job. People would get maimed or killed extremely frequently. And so in order to keep up production, the French would constantly transport more and more slaves to the colony.
To ships and taken to Haiti. You don't want to look down there. It's bad. So bad that about 15% of people down there die before they ever see land again. But France keeps bringing in ships full of Africans instead of using the people already enslaved in Haiti. Why? Because thanks to all the yellow fever, 50% of people brought to Haiti as slaves died in their first year.
Yeah, most people are not surviving due to diseases like yellow fever, that's a big one, but also, like I said, the dangerous conditions on the plantations themselves, right? So they need to keep bringing in more and more slaves to do the labor.
That statistic alone is a very good reason for people to run away, as if the enslavement wasn't enough. So, the French planters decided to make the punishment for disobedience worse than a 50% chance of death by mosquito. Whippings are just the beginning. The French used burning, castration, and that's after the king passed a bunch of laws saying what you couldn't do to slaves. French Haiti is practically Caribbean Auschwitz, and the French have been running it for 100 years.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily brutal, right? Unimaginably so. You know, across the Americas, around the world, all these slave plantation systems were brutal and violent. But San Domingue, Haiti, it was known for being exceptionally brutal.
So the French are a little afraid of an uprising, considering they're outnumbered by their slaves by, 10 to 1?
Yep.
And then the French Revolution happens, and the French...
Yeah, and by a little afraid, he means exceptionally afraid. I believe it's about 90% of the population are enslaved people, right? So this is another dynamic here, which is, compare it to, say, the slave states or the slave colonies in the United States, right? Some of the southern colonies, they relied a lot on slavery to keep their economies going, and they had high percentages of enslaved people in their populations, but even there, you're talking more like 30, 40, 50, sort of on the high end for some of these southern states. Haiti, the colony, San Domingue, it is 90% enslaved people, right? 90%, 10% free. It is an extremely brutal system, right? You can see why these slave owners, right, these colonizers were fearful of an uprising, right? It was an extremely brutal system that was right on the edge.
The French government declares all people are free and equal. This caused quite a bit of controversy back in Haiti.
It did.
How is that ambiguous? All people are free and equal. No, all people are free and equal. Anyone who isn't free and equal isn't a person. To hell with France! Think how much money we could make on our own. We would finally be free to treat our slaves however we want. I'm thinking Iron Maidens. I'm thinking acid attacks. I reckon we could do that thing where you coat them in honey and lock them in a boat with a bunch of fire ants. The Haitian Revolution began with a slave uprising in 1791.
Yeah, so there are a couple different groups on the colony of San Domingue, right? You have your white planters, your rich white planters. They're sort of colloquially known as the big whites. You can think same thing in the United States, your planter class, your Washingtons and Jeffersons, these rich guys who own big plantations. You have what are called your small whites, right? So whites who may not have owned slaves, maybe ran small businesses, ran farms themselves. You have a population of free people of color in Haiti, some of whom are more equivalent to the small whites, owned businesses, ran farms, some of these free people of color who owned slaves themselves. And then, of course, your biggest population, the 90%, are the enslaved people, right? So these are all the classes at play. Now, the sort of white planters, the big whites, they're the ones largely in charge, right? They're fearful of an uprising, a revolution, a slave uprising. Initially, the first sort of unrest that comes to the colony is less in terms of rights for the enslaved people, but it's the free people of color agitating for racial equality, right? That starts this whole controversy. Essentially, everything starts to snowball. The big whites, the white planters, are like, maybe we don't want to be associated with this French Revolution. Maybe this is not good for us. Maybe we should separate. And essentially, all this chaos breaks out into violence, sort of chaotic infighting, and then actual slave uprising as the enslaved people themselves plan an uprising and sort of rise up simultaneously in different areas of the island.
The rebels believed that the French government would be on their side, what with the freedom and equality and all, but actually, the French government gave citizenship to black Haitians who were already free, ruling that black people had rights, except for the ones that didn't.
Yeah, so initially, the government's kind of like, right, because remember, this all starts because free people of color are agitating for civil rights. And so the government goes, okay, we're going to give you those, but we're not freeing the slaves. For them, that's sort of they try to take the moderate position. But at that point, it's already too late, right? The snowball is already rolling down the hill.
The start of the revolution was a sordid, bloody affair, but as the rebels began to organize, they centered around a man named Toussaint Louverture. Louverture was willing to work with the French, even the plantation owners, to rebuild Haiti into a place where...
I would say Toussaint Louverture, he was one of a couple of revolutionary leaders in Haiti or San Domingue during this period. He emerges as the #1 most powerful. That wasn't always the case, though. At one point, he was one of many, and he was willing to work with a lot of different people, right? The French, eventually, he tries to bring some of these white planters back in to sort of stabilize the economy. So Louverture, he is sort of a practical actor, right? He's definitely a sort of compromise-based leader. He wants to sort of bring people together. That's sort of how he leads this thing.
Where all men are equal. The white plantation owners said, that noise. They're so upset over the free black people being citizens, they ask Britain to please come conquer them so they can continue being asshats. Britain says, did somebody say asshats? And sends a whole bunch of teenage soldiers to go get yellow fever in the name of autocracy, slavery, and discrimination.
Usually sending a bunch of soldiers unacclimatized to the environment to fight on Haiti is not a good idea. They're all going to immediately get yellow fever and die.
After all, the British don't want their captives over in Caribbean Dachau getting any ideas. But there's hope. In order to stop Haiti from falling into British hands, the French governor decides to work with Louverture's rebels. He passes a decree abolishing slavery in...
Yeah, and so we get to this point where the French government is like, we got to look out for ourselves, right? There's a good chance that Britain comes and takes over this colony, this extremely wealthy colony, right? We do not want to lose that. And so they turn to sort of the most powerful man on the island, and the man who looks to be their most promising partner, Toussaint Louverture. And they're like, all right, we'll work with you.
Haiti. But it's going to take more than that. Louverture knows the governor could reissue slavery tomorrow if he wanted to, so the governor takes the matter to Paris. And in a historic victory for humanity, the French government declared, representatives of the French people, until now our decrees of liberty have been selfish and only for ourselves. But today we proclaim it to the universe, and generations to come will glory in this decree. We are proclaiming universal liberty. Slavery was abolished across the French Empire. How's that for an olive branch? The governor and the rebels worked
Yeah, it took them a little bit, after they declared equality for all men. They had to sort of decide, did we really mean all men?
together to drive out the British, and those teenagers die for nothing. Huzzah! Take a minute, hold on to those happy feelings, and kiss them goodbye. We haven't talked about the Poles yet, which means this video is not over.
Right, we've had an interesting video so far where we've talked about sort of medieval into modern Poland, then we quickly switched to Haiti. If you don't know the story, you still might be wondering, what is the connection here between these two?
In 1799, Napoleon is in charge of France, and he writes a new constitution for the empire, one that is noticeably less rah-rah about human rights and citizenship. In fact, he's very clear that colonies are going to be getting special rules that are different from the way things work in...
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to say here. So the idea of special rules for the colonies, this was a big matter of contention and debate at the time, right? So the white planters in the colonies, they wanted special rules from metropolitan France because they didn't want freedom and equality declared in San Domingue, right? And so they make these arguments that you'll hear sometimes where they say, well, we have different conditions than France, and you don't understand how it is, and we have to run things this way. Versus those who are advocating for freedom and civil rights, they say, no, the same rules that apply in France should apply here in the colonies, right? So this had been a big debate. Now, Napoleon comes in, and Napoleon, he's a real mixed character, right? In some ways, he perpetuates the revolution, in other ways, he crushes it, right? Napoleon comes in, and he says, we're going to give the colonies these special rules for themselves. Now, that's an immediate sign. Uh-oh. Maybe he's not so big on freedom and abolition, right? Now, at this point, still a little unclear, but it's starting to be a little concerning. Oh, Napoleon's not gonna... He wouldn't try and bring back slavery, would he? Napoleon would never do that, right? And think we're going to see, in my opinion, how Napoleon treats and handles Haiti, San Domingue is, like I said, in my opinion, one of the blackest marks of his entire career.
France. To Louverture, who is now the governor of Haiti, that sounds a lot like slavery's coming back.
Yeah.
So in 1801, Louverture says, colonies get their own rules, awesome.
Right, yeah. So you also got this power struggle between Louverture and Napoleon, where a lot of comparisons have been made between the two, right? These two were both very sort of impressive revolutionary military leaders, who were both sort of, at this point, leading their separate countries. And so, a lot of comparisons have been made between the two. Some have actually argued that had these two only met, they could have resolved their differences. Who knows? So Louverture, he sees what Napoleon's doing, right? He begins to get worried about, okay, are you going to return slavery? And so he says, okay, we're getting our own unique rules. Well, let me do this.
So in 1801, Louverture says, colonies get their own rules, awesome, here's Haiti's rules. Under no circumstances can slavery come back, and also I'm governor for life.
Yep.
Napoleon is not amused. He sees Louverture's constitution as a call for secession, and the war begins all over again with a whole new cast of characters. To reclaim Haiti, Napoleon sends his general and brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, and gives him 2 secret instructions.
Yeah, I will say this expedition, like I said, I think this whole thing's one of the blackest marks of Napoleon's career, one of the most abhorrent moments of his career. Now, 1 is this whole thing's a disaster. It goes horribly. And 2 is what Napoleon intends to do, right? So the goal he wants to achieve is horrible, but he messes up so badly even in trying to accomplish that.
When Leclerc arrives, Louverture and his army retreat and burn down the city of Le Cap, and Leclerc is surprisingly cool about it. He writes letters to Louverture saying, no worries, man. You gotta do what you gotta do. Whenever you're ready to surrender, we've got money and a job all lined up for you, no chains attached. Though Louverture put up a hell of a fight, including one battle that supposedly degraded into 6 hours of the French and Haitians beating the life out of each other with their bare hands, at a certain point, for reasons that aren't entirely clear to me, Louverture surrenders him.
Leclerc comes back. He basically, they're fighting, but he sort of plays nice. He's like, look, we can work something out. We can negotiate. Eventually, Louverture goes to him. A lot of Louverture's men, there have been some discontent among the ranks. Well, among his sort of officer corps, right? Remember, like I said, Louverture, he is obviously the most powerful man in Haiti. He's the leader, appointed governor for life through his own authority. So he is the leader here. But there are other powerful men, right? Men who are serving under him, men who had been rivals of his. And also, after all these years of fighting, right, some just want to negotiate, make a deal with France, end it, right? And so, with that, I think Louverture, maybe aside sort of losing steam a little bit, there may be other reasons, he essentially goes to Leclerc to sort of work things out.
Himself to Leclerc. You fought with honor, sir. And now I'm going to open my first secret envelope here and you are going to rot in jail.
Yep.
Bon voyage. Louverture was gone, but
they send him back to France to rot in jail until he dies, right? So this is a pretty bad moment for Haiti. And, ironically, in doing this, France, Napoleon, he's sort of taken out his biggest enemy on the island, his biggest rival, but also his biggest potential partner, right? The thing about Louverture is we saw he was willing to compromise, he was willing to work with France, he names himself governor for life, sure, but if Napoleon had sort of agreed to have this type of relationship with Louverture where he said, we won't bring back slavery, you can run the island mostly as you see fit, as long as we can still profit, which is what France had been getting from Haiti in the first place, then it probably would have worked out. But Napoleon wasn't willing to let that sit, right? So he gets rid of Louverture, right? The biggest threat to French control of the island, but also their biggest potential to make things work. Now he's gone.
Leclerc did line up some political appointments for some of the other defectors. Without their leadership, more and more Haitians lay down their arms, and the war is nearly over. But before the war is finished, Leclerc reveals his second secret envelope. we're bringing back slavery.
Yep.
Woohoo! Go team! Yeah, so all the other Haitians that had surrendered...
Yeah, this is why I say this is like one of Napoleon's most abhorrent moments, a black mark in his career, is that he, not him individually, but, you know, through his leadership, the French reinvade Haiti, take over, and then try to reimpose slavery. You have this colony of people, of enslaved people, who have freed themselves. They've become freedmen, right? They've escaped their chains. And now, the French want to try and enslave them? That's not going to... Re-enslave them? That's not going to happen.
Immediately unsurrender, and the French are shocked that the people who just fought a war to escape slavery are unhappy about being enslaved. Well, if that's how it's gonna be, France may as well turn this into an all-out race war. The last thing Leclerc did, before dying of yellow fever, was to order every black person in the city of Le Cap to be drowned. Mind you, Leclerc was occupying Le Cap, so the only people he succeeded in killing were the ones who were still on his side. The guy who took over after Le Cap, named Rochambeau, was even worse.
Yeah, a real piece of work here. One of the most vile individuals in this whole conflict. And I will point out, you know, there's going to be a lot of violence returned from the Haitian side, but I ask you to keep in mind the French have come back, tried to re-enslave them. They're committing this horrible violence. You know, what do you think the response is going to be?
Rochambeau could make a Klansman blush through his hood.
Oh yeah, this guy's extreme.
He shows up in Haiti and sees all the people being hanged and shot and thrown into the ocean with sacks tied over their heads, and he decides it's time to take things up a notch. War crimes are such a hassle, am I right? Don't you wish you could use that time to commit more war crimes? Now you can! With my patented fumigational sulfurous baths, you can gas hundreds of POWs at once. On top of inventing...
Yeah, we're talking, this guy is a real sociopath. Like, not only is he massacring people, but he's finding the most disturbing and innovative ways of killing them. Like, it's crazy.
The f***ing gas chamber, Rochambeau imported 15,000 attack dogs trained to maul anyone who wasn't white.
Yeah.
He made the dogs racist.
And this is, you can imagine some of the scenes, right? We're talking about captured Haitian rebels literally being torn alive, right? Eaten alive by these rabid dogs, right? So, you know, just some really vile scenes.
And now we can talk about the Poles again. Racist dogs is not what the Polish Legion had signed up for. Napoleon didn't even mention that they were being sent in explicitly to enslave an entire country of people. He told them they were just being sent to put down a prison revolt. They joined the French army believing that Napoleon would one day liberate their homeland from oppressors, and now here they were in Haiti doing the oppressing.
Yeah, so the Poles are like, all right, you know, we've come, we're helping out the French, they're gonna help us free Poland. Right, it sort of gets recreated by Napoleon. Then that all ends with the Congress of Vienna. Another Poland reemerges. Congress Poland gets absorbed by Russia. Anyway, the Poles are like, all right, we're here to help the French and help ourselves. And they come into this and they're like, wait a minute, this ain't what we signed up for.
So a bunch of them just left. I mean, they couldn't get back to Europe, but about 500 or so walked out and fought for the Haitians instead.
Yeah.
Knowing they might never see their homeland again.
Shout out.
It was a very brave and selfless act. Unfortunately, their new Haitian commander was also very excited about this whole race war thing. After the French tried to spring slavery on Haiti again, the man who came to lead the Haitian Revolution was named Dessalines. He'd fought alongside Toussaint Louverture, but he had a...
So Jean-Jacques Dessalines takes over after Louverture is taken into custody. Dessalines had been Louverture's right-hand man, but also his enforcer, right? So Dessalines was the guy who Louverture sent when he wanted something messy done, right? And here's where I'll point out. Rackham's, I think, doing this as well. There's often sort of this distinction drawn between the two, right? Louverture is more willing to compromise, less violent, etc., etc., and Dessalines, you know, he's just murdering everyone. Now, look, partially, Dessalines absolutely had a more extreme approach to warfare than Louverture did. We'll see. A lot more massacres, a lot more killing of civilians, absolutely. But what I will point out is that that's what Louverture uses Dessalines for, right? Well, what do you think Dessalines does under Louverture? Louverture uses him as an enforcer, and when Louverture doesn't want to get his hands dirty, because he doesn't, that's part of his image, right? He has to be the magnanimous leader who can compromise with everybody. He sends Dessalines. And even sometimes he'll play the role of, oh, Dessalines went too far, he shouldn't have done that. But who sent him in the first place, right? So I'm just going to point out, it's not necessarily as black and white as you think, right? But Dessalines, in charge and under Louverture, he is absolutely more sort of violent in his approach than Louverture is. Of course, this whole thing is a revolution, a war, so, this is an era of great violence.
Very different way of doing things. Dessalines believed in an eye for an eye, and brother, there were a whole lot of eyes to pay for. He and Rochambeau spend the rest of the war playing tit-for-tat war crimes. Rochambeau hanged 500 black people. Dessalines found 500 white people and stuck their heads on spikes. Rochambeau had his gas chambers, Dessalines had saws, and fire. The war itself...
And obviously, look, I'm not justifying any of the violence, right? It's all terrible. But what I said earlier, the French come back, they reinvade, they take out Louverture, right, the leader of the revolution. They try to reimpose slavery on these people, and they're committing these horrible acts of violence. Really, what can you expect but a violent response, right? This is sort of the spiral of violence. In response, Dessalines leading his troops, they get violent, they commit these war crimes, these massacres as well. It's not justified, but it's not exactly surprising given the circumstances.
May have been the least brutal part of the war. One observer noted how all the soldiers were really excited for a big battle because it meant they had a chance to get shot and die in a few seconds instead of living long enough to get captured or contract yellow fever. Gradually, the war shifted in favor of Dessalines. Rochambeau abandoned the capital city, but about 100 white people had stayed behind to pledge their allegiance to Dessalines and a new Haiti. When Dessalines arrived, they welcomed him as a hero. With a tear in his eye, Dessalines told them, "This kindness, this love, this equality, I did not think it still existed in this world. This had better be the last of it." And he hanged them all. Even when the war was over, Dessalines' mission wasn't finished. Kill all the whites. We shall have their skin for parchment, their blood for ink, and a bayonet for a pen. What about those whites? But those whites are black. The only exception to Dessalines' policy of racial extermination was the Poles in his army, who were probably feeling...
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about this since this is the title of the video, right? How 500 Poles became black. And to do that, I'm going to bring us to Dessalines' Constitution. Okay, so this is Dessalines' 1805 Constitution of Haiti. We're going to read a couple articles here. So Article 12, and there are other translations you can find, by the way. I've just gone with this one on Wikipedia. It's a sort of simple translation. But Article 12, no white man of whatever nation he may be shall put his foot on this territory with the title of master or proprietor, neither shall he in future acquire any property therein. White people, they can't own any property. Okay, Article 13, right? Because they want to prevent any masters or proprietors from owning property, plantations, or slaves. This constitution, of course, also outlaws slavery, which is something that was taken from Louverture's constitution. Article 13. The preceding article cannot in the smallest degree affect white women who have been naturalized Haitians by government, nor does it extend to children already born, or that may be born of the said women. The Germans and Polanders naturalized by government are also comprised in the dispositions of the present article, right? So this is laying out the exceptions to that rule about white people. You'll notice one of those exceptions are the Poles and Germans who fought alongside the Haitians and have been naturalized as citizens. Okay, that still doesn't explain why these Poles are black. Well, let's go to Article 14. All exception of color among the children of one and the same family, of whom the chief magistrate is father, being necessarily to cease, the Haitians shall henceforward be known only by the generic appellation of blacks. Now what this means is every Haitian from now on is black, right? So the purpose of this, Dessalines wanted to decrease sort of colorism and infighting among there had been a split somewhat between what you might call black Haitians and mixed race Haitians, right? What we talked about earlier, prior to the abolition of slavery, you had 90% of the population are these black Haitians who are enslaved. There was this population of free people of color who owned property, some of whom owned slave plantations. Now, not always, but oftentimes these free people of color were mixed race or lighter skin. Right, so this had been a division in Haitian society. Dessalines puts this article in to try and erase that designation. He's saying, we're all black, right? Ignore that. Now, sort of a side effect of that is that, everyone who's naturalized as Haitian is now black. That includes these white women, Germans, the kids of these white women, and the Poles, right? So all these people who've been naturalized as Haitians by the government, they're now also black. Right, so that's how 500 Poles became black. That's sort of the answer to the title of the video.
Poles in his army, who were probably feeling really uncomfortable about this whole situation, but they were in way too deep to say anything. So Dessalines might have turned Haiti into a different kind of dystopia, but at least slavery was abolished once and for all. Until Dessalines forced everybody to work in the plantations again.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. So once again, this is something that Louverture also does. I'm not trying to play defense for Dessalines, but this starts with Louverture, right? So there's sort of a decision that those ruling over Haiti had to make, especially for Louverture, right? So they fight for the freedom of the enslaved people of Haiti. Louverture rules over not necessarily an independent Haiti, but a pretty autonomous Haiti, and he has to decide, okay, what are we going to do, right? This was the richest colony producing all this sugar. The economy's essentially been destroyed. So how do we get the economy back up and running? Now, following this deadly war and the abolition of slavery, remember we're talking about San Domingue under Louverture, Toussaint Louverture, before Napoleon sends Leclerc to invade. No one really wants to go back to the plantations, right? That's pretty understandable. These were extremely brutal places where they had been enslaved and forced to work. And so what does Toussaint do? Well, he essentially sets up this authoritarian labor regime to force people back onto the plantations, right? With punishments if they don't go back. This was a decision he made because he felt he had to keep the economy running. Now, I don't know if it was the best decision, but it's what he decided to do. I, in my opinion, there were other ways you could get the economy of Haiti running again, essentially having an economy of sort of smallholders, which I think people much would have preferred. But I understand the pressures on Toussaint Louverture. Now, Toussaint's out of the picture, now Dessalines takes over. We have an independent Haiti. And Dessalines essentially is faced with a similar situation, except now, Haiti is independent of France, by their own declaration, though there is constant risk of a French takeover. And so they have to decide, all right, what are we going to do to get the economy running? And Dessalines essentially makes the same decision. And a lot of the leaders after Dessalines, like Henri Christophe, make that same decision as well. So when faced with this situation, a lot of Haitian leaders decide, we need to get the sugar plantations running again. We're going to have to force people to go back. Not necessarily in slavery, right? They'll be paid. They'll own some of the property, they'll own some of the output, but through violence and coercion, we're going to make them go back, right? And this is something that, of course, it's taken from the initial enslavement and then war, but Louverture is the first one who sort of makes this determination, and it sort of goes from there.
And then Dessalines got assassinated, Haiti split in half, the northern half became a literal monarchy again, and then France came back.
Yeah, so let's go back to that
Haiti
map.
Split in half, the northern half.
So Dessalines is executed, right? There's a lot of infighting among his officers, the men under him, and so they kill him. Haiti splits in two for a bit. You've got the north, the Kingdom of Haiti, under Henri Christophe, who crowns himself, right? So you've got a monarchy up there. And in the south, you've got the Republic of Haiti under Alexandre Pétion. Now, you might think, well, that must be the democratic one. It's not. Pétion may be a president, not a king, but he still rules as an authoritarian. So you've got these two authoritarian states, one which is monarchical. they'll last for a couple years. Eventually, Boyer will take over both of them. There's a ton of fascinating history here that I could, go over for a long time, maybe in other videos. But yeah, there's a lot going on.
Became a literal monarchy again, and then France came back demanding reparations for the war they lost, and Haiti spent the next...
Yeah, so Boyer takes over, right? He takes over from Pétion in the south, then he takes over all of Haiti, right? Christophe is gone, Boyer rules a unified Haiti. France comes back, essentially forces Haiti to pay an indemnity, right? They were threatening military force, an invasion again, potentially, so they feel pressured to pay up. So France saddles Haiti with a 150 million franc indemnity. It's a massive amount of money. And sometimes it's also called the double debt, because then what France does is they say, oh, you don't have the money to pay off that indemnity? Well, why don't we give you some loans from our banks? So they loan Haiti out money, then they've got to pay interest on the loan, sort of forever indebting them. Right? Now, this was paid off eventually, but this sets off a cycle in Haiti where Haiti's forced to take on more and more loans to keep paying off debt, and then, takes on loans to pay off the interest payments, and it really sort of sinks their economy going forwards.
200 years in disorder and poverty. The moral of the story is the Poles and the Haitians just can't catch a break.
True. That is really true. The Poles, with no state for a long period of time, and the Haitians who fought for their freedom, fought for their own country, and then ever since have been punished by the rest of the world for freeing themselves from slavery, right? I mean, there's a whole lot to talk about. I could talk about Haitian history for a long time, both before, during, and after the revolution. I think it's all very fascinating. So yeah, this was a good video. It was a little less about this story of the Poles who fought in Haiti than you might have expected. He sort of told us a bit about Poland, did a bit about Haiti, and then eventually brought it back. But, we got the answer to that question. Well, I think he could have gone a little more into, why these Poles were considered black, why they were labeled as such, sort of how this happened. But we essentially got the story. So yeah, another interesting video from Jack Rackham. If you guys enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. With all of that, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.